It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview Denny Lennon from Sports Stories. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Brandon. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Can you talk about how you got started with your business, Sports Stories?
Absolutely. I've had different businesses as I've spent some 40 years in sports since I was about, or more than that, because I've been playing since I was a little kid, but, I've been coaching or doing some kind of promotional stuff at some point, since I've been 15 or 16. And so it was natural to come to this series of media output, I'll call it, because, I just kind of wanted to finish out my years of being an athletic director and a coach and then go after this for a little while. And I got a son who just got married. And so I put the clock on him so that by the time his kids are of age, I can start coaching them again. So I'll be back to coaching maybe in 10 years, 15 years or so. But right now, that's kind of, I just made this path to this point where I made enough connections. Relationships, always important to get to this point.
Where are some places that you've coached at?
Mostly in and around the west side of Los Angeles. I was born in Venice, California, which is on the west side of Los Angeles. I currently live in Westchester, which is just it's right next to LAX. And so you could probably track me at any of those schools, but some of them include St. Bernard High School in Playa del Rey, where I went to high school. And we were in a basketball power when I was there back in the day, and I got to return there and coach football, basketball, and baseball. I also coached at St. Mark Elementary School in Venice, which was a Catholic grade school that went K through 8. So I ran that program, and been at a couple other high schools, and there you go. And then I ran an awful lot, and I've worked a lot with the Amateur Athletic Union, running developed. Started the sport with a guy named Gino Grajeda, and I started in '94 with just 32 kids on a beach. We taught them how to play beach volleyball for juniors. It's now a national sport with high school and collegiate components.
Can you talk about being the founder of the Venice Beach Volleyball?
Yeah, so it was the Venice Backyard Championships. And where I grew up in Venice, we are probably about a mile or so away from the beach. So when we used to go to the beach and, body surf and have fun all day, then we'd maybe play some beach volleyball there. But we would always end our days back at my house, and we would play volleyball in the backyard. The streets that we were on the backside, some of them on the backside of the GI Bill. And so they're these ranch style homes, and they had big backyards. And so I come from a big family, Brendan. I have 60 first cousins, all on one side of the family. And so 3 of those families happened to be on this one street called Harding Avenue. And so we would come back and play in my backyard. But slowly but surely, we said, hey, let's start a tournament. And we're all, 19, 20 years old or whatever. And we started this tournament in my backyard with just 12 teams. But it didn't take long until we had 5 backyards, 3 front yards, all going on Harding Avenue. And 1,000 people would be descend upon our block that day. It became a big kind of reunion for Venice High School and St. Monica, St. Bernard, Samuel High. Everybody would come to this, and you'd get drawn. It was a blind draw. And you go from backyard to backyard and try to make your way to the late rounds and win the championship. It got to the point where it got so popular and was picked up in a lot of newspapers and a lot of news shows on cable and NBC and all this kind of stuff that I was able to negotiate a contract with Prime Network and bring in Shasta, and we produced our own event and put it on national cable. So it had legs.
That's cool that it went big and national. Can you talk about being a sports analyst?
Sure. The cheapest guy I could hire when I first started promoting and producing events for television was me. And so I was able, that's when I produced that first show, which was the Venice Backyard Championships. In order to keep the budget down, I hired myself as the play-by-play announcer, and then brought in a pro beach volleyball player I knew to be the commentator. So we did that, and that worked out well, and I kind of got noticed there. At the same time, Brandon, I was traveling and I was a stage announcer for women's pro beach volleyball, kind of like the MC. So I'd be up on stage, calling all the games, cueing the music, doing all those kind of things, doing all the promotions. So when people saw me there, inevitably they would ask me if hey, you know, do you want to fill in here? Do you want to fill in there? And that's kind of how it happened. I just kind of fell into filling in for, you know, Time Warner Cable on being an analyst for high school basketball games, being an analyst for football games. Any sport that I coached, I felt like I could be either a good analyst or play-by-play. So I kept picking up those different ones.
How was your experience as an analyst?
I liked it a lot. You know, those two jobs are different when you're calling the game, right? The play-by-play, you're pretty much describing and keeping everybody involved, and you're also handling your ins and outs of commercials and advertising breaks, and you know, you're kind of doing that. You got to know all of the rosters and stuff. But then, you know, when the action isn't in play, that's when the analyst has to come in and give something extra to it. So both sides of that I liked, because I like, as you could probably see by now, Brandon, I like to talk. So I did mind being the play-by-play guy. But as a coach and a longtime coach of football, basketball, baseball, volley, as a longtime coach, I can also analyze and break down what the viewer might have just saw. And so I like both of them.
Can you talk about your podcast, The Sports Stories? Sure.
So we do a few different things. On Wednesdays and Fridays, we do a live YouTube show. We like the excitement of going live, and but of course that's always going to be archived on our YouTube site, and that's at youtube.com/SSDL Sports Stories Denny Lennon. So that's where those are, and we go live at 5 on Wednesdays, and on that particular one, we focus on preps to Olympians. I have this long affiliation with the Amateur Athletic Union and being a high school administrator and coach, so going preps to Olympians made sense. And that's what we focus on. And then on Fridays, it's kind of like a Tonight Show, because I was a big fan of the Johnny Carson show growing up, which I'm sure a lot of people are going, wait, what? Well, Jimmy Fallon now is a long successor to who Johnny Carson was. But I love that show where you'd have a couple guests on and they could interact and they could stay in and on the queue. And that's what we do on the Friday night show, make it a little more loose, and they come in. So that's our Friday show at 5 o'clock. And then every Thursday, we drop a new video podcast. And those are something I would have recorded in advance, sometimes right here out of our studio, which is really a converted garage. Sometimes we'll go to either a restaurant or we'll go to somebody's house and we'll do a real long form interview. And then we'll take that and we'll post produce it later. And so that there's some kind of historical and social context to it. And then we release it. And I like to think of that one in the style of like 60 Minutes or something like more of a magazine show that's long form. So those are the three different things we release. We've certainly, we've currently just kind of found a way to cover a really cool guy that's based in Los Angeles. His name's Jonas Never, and he's a muralist, and he's done a lot of famous sports murals in and around, you know, Venice, Santa Monica, Culver City, and the extended Los Angeles area. He's now been picked up to do some at national spots, and he's got some really great ones. So on every Tuesday, we go find one of his murals and provide social and historical context to it. So like today, he's got one where he does a take on the movie Point Break, and he's got, you know, Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze sitting in a car, and they're casing the bank, and it's literally across the street that the bank that they're looking at out of this, and it's got like Johnny Utah on the top of it. And so we're going to go look at that, and I'm going to let everybody know, you know, this is where you can find it. Here's what this means, and that kind of stuff. So we do that every Tuesday. And then Saturday, Sunday, Monday, we just prep for the week, baby. It's just like football season.
That's so cool that you go out in the community to find the murals, because I know whenever I was looking you up, I was like, that's a cool mural. So like if I ever went to LA, I'll be like, let me go there.
That's right. Yeah, I'm glad. That's what we want. We want people to we're very fortunate, you know, there's a lot going on in Los Angeles right now. It's a very difficult place on several levels to be, with the fires, with the pandemic. There's a homeless population that continues to grow. It's really hard for city services to keep up with a lot of things. Okay. And so we know that that's going on, and we're not ignoring that. But we also want to remind everybody that LA is this great place that has, you know, a long history of art and culture too. And not to mention some awesome sports teams, of which 3 of them are doing some damage right now.
Can you talk about your business, the Lennon Sports?
Yeah. So the business I have going right now is Sports Stories Inc., right? And that's Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. But I think what you might be referring to is the business I used to have, which was called Lennon Sports. And that was more of a promotion-based business. And so that was it was a limited LLC that covered what I was doing with Amateur Athletic Union, which is a nonprofit group, but it covered the promotions on that side. I also was doing camps and clinics, and then it also covered promotion of bigger events, some of which were beach volleyball, some of which were basketball and stuff like that. So that's what that was. And that basically, I think, if I'm not mistaken, would have been in the like early, 90s, somewhere through the 90s, something like that, is when I had Lennon Sports, and I had an office in Santa Monica. And so it was good because I needed to provide that structure. It got me a fair amount of awareness. But I think one of the best parts of that was one day I have a famous boxing announcing uncle. His name was Jimmy Lennon. And he really did a lot for boxing in the early days. He announced out of the Olympic Auditorium out of here in Los Angeles. His son is now Jimmy Lennon Jr., who does some of the biggest fights. You probably notice he's the one who, when the things goes down, he goes, "It's showtime." And the whole place explodes with lights and all that stuff. That's Jimmy Lennon Jr. So, but my uncle was a revered boxing announcer. So one day I'm sitting in my office. I got a sign on the outside of the door. It says Lennon Sports. Guy walks in and I'm like, whoa, that's Ray Mancini. That's Boom Boom Mancini. And he comes in and he goes, somebody Lennon here? And I go, yeah. And he said, your uncle was like a father to me. He was such a great inspiration. He always looked out for me and took care of me. And so, and since that day, I've been friends with Boom Boom Mancini. So that to me is one of the great benefits of having a storefront.
That's so cool that you get to experience those times.
Yep.
Can you talk about some of your favorite guests that you've had on the Sports
Absolutely.
Story?
My all-time favorite, this guy takes first place, and it's hard to bump him off of that spot. And his name's Norm Bass. Norm Bass was the first Black American post-World War II to play pro football and pro baseball. He came out of the South. They got out of the Jim Crow laws in the South, and they settled up in Vallejo, California, which is not far from Oakland. Up there, he and his brother's name is Dick Bass. And if you look up Dick Bass, you'll find out he was an all-pro running back for the Rams in the 60s. But they were like great athletes at Vallejo High School. By the time Norm had come up through Vallejo High School, he was a sensation. He could hit the ball, baseball further than anybody. He threw upper 90s. He also was a great football player. He led his team to a victory over the South in the Shrine game. He was this big-time athlete, really good in basketball, everything. He was signed by Charlie Finley of the Kansas City Athletics, which was then the Kansas City Athletics. So he goes out, he makes a big team, he even strikes out Mickey Mantle, he even gives up Roger Maris, one of those home runs in that storied 1961 year. But Norm, something was wrong. He knew something was wrong because he was having a hard time starting to grip the ball, and he was starting to lose his ability sometimes to like bounce back like he wanted to. So slowly but surely, his skills deteriorated where he couldn't grip the ball, and he didn't know why. He was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis eventually, severe, right? Here's the thing, though. Before that diagnosis came down and he got kind of moved backwards in baseball, he decided to go out for the Denver Broncos. And he makes the team. Out of 120 people, right, he just goes and he makes the starting team. And he could lay the wood out of the backfield, and he was their best backfield, and he even could kick better than all the kickers. Now, that said, only a couple of games in, he couldn't do it anymore. His body was ravaged. He's only 26 years old, and he got run out of sports. And it wasn't great for him, Brandon. He was not a good man for a long time. He was angry at life. He was angry that it got taken away from him. But through his faith and through table tennis, he found redemption. And by the age of 60, he had worked his way from the park and rec system into the United States Table Tennis Association and had distinguished himself as a really strong table tennis player. He played this chopping game where he just knew the angles, and he was such a good athlete and so competitive. He also, that was the only way he could grip the club because his arthritis had really taken over. That said, he was a designated Paralympic athlete. He ends up at the Sydney Olympic Games in 2000 and wins the bronze medal at the age of 60. Now, that is a crazy story. All of that story is so engaging more engaging is Norm Bass. He's hilarious. He's about the funniest man you'll ever meet. He's kind of like a mixture between Muhammad Ali and Red Fox. This guy is so funny. And I mentioned those two names because him and his brother and a few guys used to call themselves the Black Pack. And they hung out in an area of Los Angeles. And whenever black entertainers or black athletes come through town, that's where the party was. He used to party with Red Fox, Muhammad Ali, Aretha Franklin. I could just go on and on with all these guys that would come and party in that area. And he's got stories about all of them. And they've been verified. I had an author who did a great book out here and works with me on some projects. He verified virtually all his stories. So the guy is like legendary, and not everybody knows who he was. And I love that I didn't know who he was. I just created a friendship with him at my local YMCA. And then eventually at some point I came to realize who he was, did this great sit down at his favorite restaurant where everybody loves him. And I love that series. And so I encourage anybody, if you want to go learn about Norm Bass on my YouTube series. It's there on our Thursday podcast. So that's my favorite one, Brandon. That's
such an inspirational story. Can you talk about how you get people onto your podcast?
You know, some of it is long-time relationships, right? So I've been with the Amateur Athletic Union for a long time now, since 1994. I've been a coach at some level or another since about 1980. Okay. I have been involved with my family, obviously, since I was born, but my family is big. And at the top end of my family, not only was my Uncle Jimmy, but there's a singing group called the Lennon Sisters. They're my oldest cousins, and they were really famous on the Lawrence Welk Show in like the 1950s and 60s, and then went on to a career from there. But through that, my uncle and then I got my family that's about my age. They're the band Venice that went out, and so it's a very musical family, but entertainment oriented. And then all of us played a lot of sports. You add that up by 60 and all of that, that's a lot of people that we know. So between all of those different connections, that's one way. And the other way is never being afraid to ask. I felt like I had good relationships with people, and I just would ask them to come on the show, and we try to make it the best show we could. So, that's how it worked out. And then there's somebody like Jeff Pearlman who wrote the book, Three Ring Circus, who I just hit up on direct messaged him off of Twitter. And he said, sure, I'll do it. So it's a combination of knowing people. And it's a combination of not being afraid to ask.
Can you talk about owning a sports empire like you've had?
Yes. I could, but then if I gave you all the secrets to my empire, I'd have to kill you, Brandon, and nobody wants to do that. At this point, the empire is still growing. We're still in the initial phases of this new media game. But I've owned companies, and then I've also just worked for schools and worked for people before. And there's a big difference when you own or you operate or you're a small business owner, it never leaves. You're constantly thinking about it. You wake up to it. You go to sleep to it. There's never a time you stop thinking about it. When you work for somebody else, you tend to clock out when the clock stops. And so there's a little bit of peace of mind on that, but not for me. For me, I really like being all in on something. And even when I did work for somebody else, I was always like an athletic director or something, but I'd hire myself as a coach. And as a coach, you feel like you're owner of a small business. And so you never stop thinking about the next game or the next practice. So that's just kind of how I'm wired. And I think that's what kind of works the best is just, you constantly review and try to get better and try to learn more, not be afraid to make mistakes and just keep making yourself better throughout. And so I don't know, I guess that's the main thing I would tell people that own small businesses or getting involved in something new is just don't be afraid to make mistakes, man. Aggressive mistakes, that's usually the team that wins.
Speaking about being a coach, what are some future advice that you would give future coaches?
I think to consider where they'll be 20, 30 years later. And that's not always easy when you're in your 20s to look down that road. But as I look back, and I remember being a young coach at 20 years old, coaching a high school team or grade school team or something. And I remember I originally started coaching like I was coached, which included a lot of yelling and focus on the things that athletes were doing wrong. and I didn't feel good when I went back home those nights. And I immediately changed. I changed because my heart didn't feel good. I didn't like yelling at young people. And the other part of it was I read Coach Wooden's books, starting with Practical Modern Basketball. They Call Me Coach, a few of these other ones. And when I read those, that gave me the foundation I needed to then follow my heart, which was to be a nicer coach. Now, I'm sure you could interview all of my ex-athletes, and not all of them are going to say I was great. But I think the vast majority of them will tell you I worked in their best interest. I cared about them as a person, and I cared about how they gained something from being part of one of my teams. Whether and I don't even know if that had anything to do with the team that year, but hopefully they gained something. Their character was a little bit stronger. Their ability to deal with situations of pressure was better. They had fun. They had lifetime memories. All of those things are really important. And if you really take care of the person and then do your work and make sure you put your team in a position that they can to do their best, the victories will add up. Those will take care of themselves. Stay true to being a good person and coaching young people and pushing them in the direction that they need to be pushed in.
That's great advice. What advice would you give future sports business owners that's looking to start a business, or even that has a business that's looking to go into empiring?
Well, it's not easy. That there's a lot of competition, but if you have a sports background, you're probably wired for competition. So that part helps. But just know that I think what we've seen. Look, when I was a kid, you would get your sports in the newspaper. They'll get delivered, or you would get it at like 11 o'clock at night, actually more like 11:14 or something, when your local sportscaster would come on and give you 5 minutes of sports. And that's where the sports was. If you're fortunate, maybe there's a radio show or something like that, right? And so even your home teams or games you want to watch weren't on live television. A lot of times those were on delayed television. Now there's such a massive business involved here, where so many sports are in real time, and there's so many outlets that means two things. It means there's a lot of people in the marketplace that are pushing that, so there's a lot of competition, but there's a lot of space to do things. Furthermore, we've seen I would point it to ESPN. ESPN was founded, not many people know that the first E is entertainment. It's the Entertainment and Sports Programming Network. That's how it was founded. And because they had the wherewithal and the foresight to see at that time that entertainment and sports were merging, that this wasn't just a straightaway sports thing anymore, that they were starting to merge. And so know that you don't just have to report the actual score that's happening, the draft choice, or what's going on, that there's other parts to this that can also be socially relevant and interesting to people. And it's not just the full-on sports people that watch sports. There's a lot of peripheral out there. There's a lot of people who are more interested in the stories than they are in the sports. And so that's a big business. So I would encourage at one level to say, hey, there's a lot of room. And I would also counsel to say there's also a lot of competition.
Where can my listeners find your podcast and your channel on social media?
So on YouTube, we put all our programming at youtube.com/SSDL. Okay. So Sports Stories, Denny Lennon. So youtube.com/SSDL. My Twitter handle is here, and certainly you can find the links here. That's at Sports Stories DL. And that's also website domain. So if you just want to go to the website and then click from there, the website is sportsstoriesdl.com.
Thank you again, Denny, for your interview, and best of luck in the future with your sports business.
Hey, best of luck to you too, Brandon. It's been my honor to be on your show.
Thank you. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Denny, for your interview, and best of luck.
Same, buddy.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.